Geico presents Our Town, Season 4, a 30-minute podcast produced by Best Bark Communications, a small but fierce client-centered marketing company powered by decades of experience and well-established business networks. Geico, 15 minutes can save you 15% or more on car insurance. Now, here's your host, Andy Ockershausen.
This is Our Town, Andy Ockershausen, with a special guest who's really not special. He's a big part of the woodwork here at WMAL. He's a big part of the station and its success, a big part of my life because I've known him since he was a kid, and I hired him at WMAL. It's maybe one of the biggest mistakes I ever made, but I lived with it for years, and all of a sudden John Matthews became a star. John, welcome to Our Town.
Oh my goodness, you are really blowing it up this morning.
Your skirt, blows your skirt up, whatever blows you. John, what a great thing, though, that you have came here as a kid, a young man out of school. Mm-hmm. Why did you pick Syracuse to go to school?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, they had a great broadcast program, but number two, my sister went there before I did, and being
your talented sister,
my talented sister Julie, she was there before I went, and she's a couple of years older than me, I really hadn't toured a whole lot of college campuses. So when she went there, one of the only college campuses I'd ever seen was in Syracuse, New York, at Syracuse University. So I ended up going there, and they had a great broadcast program too. So
where did you grow up, in Washington or Frederick?
I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland.
Oh, you did, right here?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Your dad was a builder and lived here.
My dad was a builder. He built the first house that he ever owned. He built in Silver Spring. And I grew up. What
was your relationship to Frederick? Did your grandmother live in?
My grandparents lived in
That's
Frederick.
That's what I thought.
Lived in Frederick, Maryland. And my dad grew up in Gallipolis, Ohio. And
I know it well.
Yeah. He grew up in Gallipolis, Ohio, and moved his family here. Moved us here.
You were born in Ohio?
No, I was born in Richmond, Virginia. I was born in the capital.
That's on the way to Ohio.
He had a construction job down there, and he was a builder, and he had a construction work down there. So he had my two sisters and I, and shortly after I was born, I was less than a year old, we moved up here to the D.C. area, and we lived in Langley Park and Tacoma Park in apartments. We moved to a house near downtown Silver Spring, and then my dad built a house in the White Oak Hillendale area of Silver Spring, and that's where I grew up.
John, it's great to hear you say, I've known your dad for 40, 50 years. I didn't realize all of these things. I knew he's a local guy, and I consider Frederick our town because we had more listeners in Frederick than the Frederick stations had at one time.
Sure.
And there was a reason for that, our signal. But John, you've had a great experience in our town. The moves, obviously you learned things, you knew things, and did you try any other school besides Syracuse?
Not for college. I went to Springbrook High School, and then I went to Syracuse, and then I got my internship at WMAL. I was interviewed by the producer of the Harden and Weaver program. That would be Janice Iacona, who basically you said interview this kid and then give him an internship. She did, and she did. And my first job was putting away records in the music library.
Lots of those.
Lots and lots of records in the music library.
You were on the inside, John.
Absolutely.
A big thing now looking back.
Library? That's exactly right. And, the interesting thing was I ended up in news. And I started out, the reason I started in the programming department was, like a lot of young men in college, I wanted to work in sports. And that was, to me, you had the Redskins, you had Maryland. Sure, it was a stepping stone. So I went into the programming department, got a couple of months into my internship, and they had an incident down at the Washington Monument. There was a guy who had backed a step van up to the foot of the Washington Monument, said it was full of explosives and he was going to blow up the Washington Monument. The news department at the time sent Ed Meyer and Larry Matthews down to the Washington Monument, and several other reporters during the course of the day. And at one point, given the technology of the day, they were getting their broadcasts back and forth with two-way radios, essentially walkie-talkies.
That's the way it was.
And it was the way it was. And during the course of the day, because this went on from morning until well into the evening, the batteries were dying on these things. So they needed somebody to go down and
Put yourself in harm's way.
The school marm in charge of the newsroom, Dorothy Jones, had to make sure that they got sent lunch. So she sent down lunch, and she sent me down with some fresh batteries for their radios. And I went down there and basically helped out for a couple of hours as it finally ended. I think there were snipers who shot the guy in the van. There were no explosives in the van. Nothing was going to blow up. But I assisted there, and it kind of put me on the radar screen of the news department.
I see.
And after my internship was over,
were you on the switchboard at the time?
Well, not yet. But after my internship ended in the programming department, right. I wanted a job, and a job opened up at the front desk. And I became a receptionist. I was a receptionist out there for 2 years.
But it may have been the number one job in the building because you knew everything in the building. Knew everybody coming through that door, correct?
Yep, absolutely. And meanwhile, I was on the radar screen of the news department. They knew I was out there. I produced Ken Beatrice's Sports Call. That was another side job that I had. And eventually...
what an experience, though.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things you mentioned, John, naming these names, and Ed Meyer... the news people, Bob Neiser, Bud Steele, these were professional radio voices.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
What a great opportunity for a young guy like you to be associated with these people.
It was such a training ground. And then once I got to the news department, what happened was, I'm going to tell you another true story. I was desperate to get a job on the other side of the door from the front desk. I wanted to be on the inside. And I sat out there for far too long doing that job and doing Ken Beatrice and other things on the side. What happened eventually was the other general manager in the building, Ernie Fears, came to me and he said, "You've been doing this for too long. It's time for you to move on." Because he wanted, the receptionist job, the front desk was basically a breeding ground for new people to come in. And I had been sitting out there for too long. So... I don't really know who it was directly, but after that word got out that the other general manager said I'd been there too long, suddenly a news assistant's job opened up in the newsroom, and that was where that's where my career in news started.
What a great opportunity to be working with the talented people and Malargo Ardin. I mean, the females in our department were untouched in this town. Nobody could touch them.
We were EEOC before EEOC even existed. I mean, we had a news department that had minority representation, it had Hispanic representation, and African American representation, and lots of women in there. It was not just an old white guy kind of news operation.
It never was, John. That's what made it so great. It was diversity.
We had a
but
ton
it wasn't
of diversity
because the government's had it. We did it because it was good business.
Sure.
These reporters, female, got stories that the males couldn't get.
Well, it was a great news culture, and it's been more than 30 years since I started in the newsroom. But there were things that I learned back in 1984, 1985, 1986, basically news values that we still apply today in 2018 in the WMAL newsroom.
Well, because of you, John. I mean, you were the spark plug to keep this thing alive. Listen to your voice at 6 o'clock in the morning, which is I have been doing since you've been doing it, is an incredible accomplishment. How long have you been doing morning radio? 20 years. I've been
working in morning drive pretty much my entire career.
Right.
And there was a time after I became the news director, I hired someone. I had been the assistant news director, the managing editor for a while. And when I became news director, it was like, okay, it's time for me to go from working in mornings to working more or less a 9-to-5 job, something like that. And so I hired Scott Wyckoff, who now works at WBAL in Baltimore. I hired him to be my assistant. He was a great hire. And I put him on to do assignment work in the morning and all of that stuff. And I went to work like a 9-to-5 job. And I did that for like 2 months, and I hated it. I hated working 9 to 5. I had become accustomed to working in the mornings, and
that was your life.
It was my life. And basically, because I was news director, I could make these decisions. I said, Scott, you're working 9 to 5. I'm going back to mornings. And I came back to mornings, and I've worked mornings ever since. And a lot of people, when I anchor now, I'm getting up at 2:15 in the morning. People look at me like I have, horns coming out of my the top of my head, and they're like, "How can you do that?" And I'm like, "If you live in our town and you don't take advantage of opportunities to miss traffic, then I got to worry about
John.
you.
You're right.
And if there's one thing about my lifestyle that I've had all of these years, getting up and being at work by 4:30 in the morning at the latest, I don't know what morning drive is, what morning drive traffic is like, and I don't know what afternoon drive traffic is like, and I consider that a blessing. I love the hours that I work.
Well, you learned from some pretty good leaders too. That were early birds. Len Deibert.
Oh yes.
The people who made this station great were early birds because they cared about the news.
Yeah.
They cared about what...
And that's when decisions are made. The decisions, you hear the news, whether you use TV as the model, you hear news, the 6 o'clock news on television. Well, the decisions, except for breaking news, the decisions on stories that you're hearing at 6 o'clock at night were made at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Absolutely.
And 6 o'clock in the morning. So it is when the action is made.
Well, John... And talking about the people, and I want to talk to you about that. But right now, we're going to take a break because Andy-O and Our Town, with one of the leaders of Our Town, John Jack Jr. Matthews.
The natural habitat of a creepy doll is a horror movie. It can't help being creepy. It's that small, fixed smile and those never-closing eyes, always watching you, plotting, which you're imagining. It's mindless. But when the creepy doll hears that Geico not only saves people money, but also gives them easy access to emergency roadside service through an award-winning app, it knows you should switch. Because yes, switching to Geico is a no-brainer. The only question is, how did the creepy doll move from the bedroom to the hallway? I would get out of the house.
This is Sonny Jorgensen. Got a confession to make. I let my wife drag me to one of those Mike Collins estate planning seminars. Like I don't have enough on my plate with a certain football team. Actually, it wasn't too bad. In fact, we both learned a whole lot about how to protect our kids and grandkids down the road and to take care of ourselves right now. So if you get one of Mike's invitations in the mail, go. I'm glad I did. Get all the information and register online at MikeCollins.com. That's MikeCollins.com.
You're listening to Our Town with Andy Ockershausen. Brought to you by Best Bark Communications.
This is Our Town, Andy Ockershausen, and I'm talking with the news director of the greatest radio station in the world, WMAL, and John Matthews, who grew up here after his career, wasted years at Syracuse, I tell everybody, because you didn't learn anything. You learned more here on the switchboard than you did at every place. I've told
my interns over the decades, you'll learn more in 3 months of interning here than you will in 4 years of college. And that was absolutely true in my case, and I think it's absolutely true in their case. True.
And your opportunity, John, when you look back at those days, the golden years, I call them, for a lot of reasons, because they were gold. We made so much gold, it was incredible. But the talented people that you came in contact with, just the lunch bunch, the people that you grew up with. Listening to Bill Trumbull at lunch was worth its weight in gold.
I spent a lot of years catering for the lunch bunch. I was walking up and down Jennifer Street wearing out a path in the sidewalk to buoy mongers. I probably did that 4 days a week for about 5 years, getting lunch for Chris Core and Bill Trumbull and Eileen Griffin and Janice Iacona and Diane Early and all kinds of people.
Lottery tickets.
Oh, doing all of that, and I would bet you I did that for like 5 years, and I bet you in the 30 years since then, I probably haven't eaten at buoy mongers 5 times.
But it was a natural little place to go to for the staff here.
Sure, this is a great, in Chevy Chase, D.C., just 1 block across the D.C. line. This has just been a wonderful neighborhood to work in. It's safe. There's a lot of amenities. It's right off the metro, and it's a wonderful part of town for people to work in. Just down the hall here at 4400 Jennifer Street, what used to be the AM sales department is now the home of Westwood One News. Yeah. And they just moved in about a year ago and into beautiful new facilities that they built here on the same floor as WMAL. And when I talk to people there, they're just glad. They love that they moved here. They were downtown near Capitol Hill, in a decrepit building, which has since been torn down, and they were so happy to come up here and join us on Jennifer Street.
And now they're in a great location for a lot of reasons.
Sure.
But again, back to these talented people that appear on and off in my life, and particularly Frank and Jack in the morning, but I always thought that Tom Gazer is one of the best radio salesmen I ever listened to. He knew how to sell a product, and he was so good at it, so enthusiastic. And then, it paid off for us because our people on the air, John, were all selling product, not reading commercials. They were selling something.
Absolutely, and they all stood for things. And you knew with just as it happened with Paul Harvey, you knew that these people bought into the products that they were selling. They were not selling something that they didn't have a personal touch or a personal hand in. And you knew, and that's what made him such great salesman. You knew that if they were telling you about it, that it was a product worth owning.
Absolutely. They were trying to do you a favor. We thought that was a big part of our information. As an information station,
Sure.
Commercials were important to us, John.
You just mentioned Tom Gager, and you mentioned we were talking about Ed Meyer and the other great titans of WMAL who work here. You know what's a wonderful thing in the 21st century, and you and I are friends on Facebook, and Janice and I are friends on Facebook. Facebook is just the most wonderful thing. You mentioned Tom Gager, and in a previous world 10 years ago, you'd mention somebody who you haven't seen or anything, you wouldn't know. Oh, I wonder whatever happened to him. I see all of these people on Facebook every day, and I know what's happening with all of them, and I never see any of them, but at least I know what they're up to.
Social media.
Yep. Tom Gager, I just saw he posted the other day, said he's 78 years old, and he's very active in his... I know, Janice, my eyes popped like that, too. But he's very active, in terms of political thought and opinion, and as we all are. And
very active.
Whether you like...
Who could be more active? Unfortunately, he's not here, but Chris Core is now in the political world.
Yeah.
And standing out there and doing his thing.
Sure.
And doing it brightly. But his era changed because there'll never be another Trumbull and Core.
Sure.
That was such a unique part of radio. Of course, Harden and Weaver, they grew up in a different world, but these guys were younger, but they achieved something in the marketplace to me that was unbelievable with a huge audience in Afternoon Drive.
Yep, absolutely. And, I loved, I largely worked in mornings, but I loved working.
Just listening to him.
I loved working with Trumbull and Core.
Bill.
Jackie Bill. And, when I was a kid, I told you that my entree into WMAL was to try to go through sports. And I grew up listening to Maryland football and basketball and the Redskins on WMAL.
Always.
My first exposure to Bill Trumbull in my life was when I was about 13 years old. The Redskins were going to the Super Bowl, and he was taking calls on the air one day. And I called him. I was like 13 years old. I had written a song that I sang to him on the air about the Redskins going to the Super Bowl. And, he was very gracious in having me on and letting me sing it. And I became a Bill Trumbull fan that day, and it was at least a decade before I'd even met him. So Bill Trumbull is also the guy. My very first day.
Can you sing a few bars?
No, I'm not going to do that.
Come on, John.
No. That song, I didn't write that song. That was Barney Breeskin, but that's a whole nother story altogether.
With lyrics by Mrs. George Marshall.
That's right. And at one point, there was some trade involving the Cowboys to get the rights to the song back. Well, whatever. We're not going to go there. But Bill Trumbull, my very first day in this radio station in September of 1982, the very first day I met him, he said, "Hi, I'm Bill Trumbull. Hi, I'm John Matthews. Radio is terrible. Don't get into it." That was the very first words out of Bill Trumbull's mouth. He was like, no, he didn't say radio is terrible. He said, "There's no money in radio. Don't get into it."
He was right.
I didn't listen, but you know what? He didn't listen either. And a whole lot, all of this may be right, but a whole lot of people who loved this business ended up making a good living and a good life out of being at WMAL, and I'm one of them.
And Trumbull was too. Remember this? He was always Mr. Worrywart.
Oh, yes.
About everything. He was a nervous wreck. And he would believe that.
That's where his energy
you
came
couldn't
from.
have kept him away here. Wild horses couldn't even keep him away.
No.
One of the things that I grew up with, John, at WMAL, nobody got rich working here with money, but they got rich with friendship, with the market influence, with prestige. They wouldn't have gotten anywhere else in the world. This is the capital of the world, and the president of the United States or the vice president is listening to WML radio in the morning.
And it was, and I'm still here. I still work at this radio station, but to take it back to that, when I came here in 1982 and told people that I was interning at WMAL, it opened so many doors in terms of what people thought of me. They're like, "You got into WMAL?" And when I became a news reporter about 5 years later,
a street reporter,
I was the first morning drive street reporter in Washington D.C. And when I got that job, people used to walk up to me and say, "Do you know Larry Krebs?" Because Larry Krebs worked the overnights, and I would come on after. The idea was I would come on after Larry Krebs had been up all night with Bill Mayhugh, and so Larry actually took me around and introduced me to a whole bunch of police officers and made my early reporting years easier, because if I dropped the WMAL call letters, police officers and firefighters who would otherwise not give me the time of day, they would be like, "Well, Larry's going to want me to talk to you," so right. Boom, boom, boom. And he was very gracious in that way.
He shared. He would, he worked 24 hours a day for this radio station without compensation for the 24 hours. He got paid, but just a union job.
You know why? It's because, like what I was saying, the association with WMAL is worth more than money in a lot of cases.
In his life, it took him all over the metropolitan area. He fed more cops than you can shake a stick at, and gave coffee to firefighters all night long, and many a fire.
Yep.
But that was Larry. You couldn't stop him.
I had not heard Larry's voice in a long, long time, and recently, of course, we lost Bill Mayhugh. And when on the occasion of his passing, I got a chance to listen to some air checks from Bill Mayhugh's show, and just listening to the rapport that he and Larry Krebs had.
It was unbelievable.
It was amazing, and it doesn't exist in this world anymore. But having an overnight personality, and even though using those two words together, overnight and personality, that just doesn't exist in this world.
Well,
overnight radio now is turn on the automation. Yeah, sign off or turn on the automation.
Play the song, start a banner, and sign off. But we stayed on with a personality and a news guy and a staff to back him up.
And there was no other radio station in America. If you wanted to hear the entire soundtrack of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Oklahoma, there was no other place in the world you could hear that at 3 o'clock in the morning. He'd play one side, go take a nap, have the board op come and wake him up. He'd play a commercial, flip over the record, and he'd say, "Here's the other side of Oklahoma," and then he'd play that and go back to bed. That was Bill Mayhugh.
When we were remembering on Facebook, Bill Mayhugh, March Kamaki said her first day of meeting Bill Mayhugh, he was sleeping on the floor in the newsroom.
Yep.
And she turned the lights on and woke him up.
You never knew where you were going to find. You never knew where you were going to find Bill.
Nope.
We used to have nice long flat couches out in the lobby, and you'd come in at 3 or 4 in the morning. There he'd be there. So
he was able to change his life to meet his job specifications. Instead of sleeping at night, he was working. But then during the day, he could play golf. He could be around. He could do things. He went to a lot of events and so forth. He just turned his life, and he was able to do it.
Yeah.
It was a tough beginning, but he did it.
It was wonderful, and the personalities that I've met and worked with here. I know that recently, and the opportunity to share what I've ingested of WMAL with other people who also have an appreciation for the radio station. I know recently you had on Stephen Portnoy.
Oh yes.
Who is somebody who I hired out of college at Syracuse, by the way. I hired him right out of college, and Stephen is I don't know exactly how old he is, but Stephen's in early 40s probably, but he's got the soul of a 70-year-old man, and he had a complete and full appreciation of this radio station and its call letters before he ever walked in the door here. And I think it's part of what kept him. And he was actually a New Yorker, and he was in Washington. I hired him as he was working he was an intern in the Syracuse's Washington program. They send people down here for semesters, and he was interning at ABC News and looking for some part-time work, and I hired him right out of there. But he was otherwise a New York kid. He came to WMAL and he fell in love with us, and he fell in love with Washington, and he never left.
There's so many great stories. One of my stories that I was privy to because I heard it. News guy Eric Engberg.
Mm-hmm.
Eric Engberg was just a reporter with us. He wasn't a star, but Steve Gilmartin was a broadcaster, and a very delightful man, and a great broadcaster.
Former voice of the Redskins.
We're at a party in the Sheraton Park Hotel, celebrating something with the radio TV correspondents. One of the political persons said to Gil Martin in a group, he said, "You're just an average sports announcer." And Engberg said, "Yes, but he's in the top 3 average broadcasters." He had lived that right. Engberg jumped right in there. Eric was a big fan of WMAL. He left and got that great job, but so many people stayed, John, and it wasn't the money, it was the chance. They loved the job. In spite of the things that went on in the newsroom with, Deibert and the guys were all part of a team. Deibert was an early morning riser. He was here all the time. Even if he wasn't here, he was listening.
Sure.
He made it part of his life.
Well,
Dorothy Jones, it was her life.
Part of what made the WMAL News Department an acclaimed thing was not only the people in the news department, and I'm not diminishing that at all, it was also Andy Ockershausen. Oh, yeah. The week after I started here, this again, September of 1982, and this video exists, and I suggest you play some of it. It was the week I started. You guys recorded a whole bunch of commercials walking through the newsroom, and it is such a great time capsule of WMAL during the time, because you walk through the newsroom. Not only do we see you, and the newsroom looks pretty much just the same as it did then.
It didn't change a bit.
We put new desks in there, but the layout looks exactly the same. But you walk through the newsroom, and you're walking past Mike Anders, Pat Anastasi, Lucille Bauer, Len Deibert. Larry Krebs was sitting working at a desk, which is the stupidest thing ever, because he never did that in real life. Karen Leggett, and all of that is just with you walking through the newsroom, and then the commercial ends with you walking down the main hallway and greeted by Harden and Weaver. And it is such a wonderful, just a wonderful time capsule of what this place was. And then at the same series of ads the same year, there was an ad with you walking through the main lobby of the Kennedy Center. The Kennedy Center.
With all the talent.
With all of the talent, all of them wearing shirts so that you know exactly who they are. And, all the way down to the weekend personalities, Karen Henderson and Diana and Bill Grant. And you made sure you got every single stinking person who worked at that radio station was in there. And I saw a bunch of the outtakes of it, and you're trying to get everybody to walk with you in line, and people are not looking into the camera.
It was terrible.
Ed Walker wasn't looking into the camera, but,
we had every single talent on the air that morning.
You did. And those were wonderful commercials.
We were supposed to shoot that outside, and the weather was bad, but it was a blessing to be inside.
Yep, and it worked. It worked great. The other commercial is outside of the building here, and Janice is closing the van door, and and you see the WMAL station wagon going by, and the WMAL van going by, and the WMAL sedan going by.
We had the airplane too.
Yeah, you had the airplane with Captain Dan, and then they had you at RFK Stadium with Pete Wysocki and Johnny Holiday and Ken Beatrice running out of the tunnel, and it was just such a wonderful time. And just to get back to my point about you as a pitch man, as a P.T. Barnum, making the radio station not bigger than it was, because we were a huge institution at a time when FM radio was really nothing and AM radio was king. We had a presence in this town. Our personalities on radio were as big or bigger than any TV personalities.
No question about it, John.
It was WMAL and Willard Scott, and that was and for a long time we had Willard Scott as part of WMAL too. So
we got them all in eventually. John, you're such a fountain. That's why I'm so delighted you agreed to do this on our town, because you know as much as any human being about what greatness is and what greatness is. And you were a big part of that greatness, John. Even as a young man, you were part of it, and you helped to develop the talent. You made Trumbull better. I don't know why, but you did. Because he liked to perform. And,
sure.
And the people that we had, and as you know how much Janice has done for this broadcast company, I know it, and now Ken, and we're just delighted to be here, John Matthews, and I hope you send this tape to your dad, who's a very big fan.
Yes.
Because of you.
I absolutely will. I could sit here and talk
WMAL
all day, which is why you had me in. But
that's what we wanted to talk about.
If you don't think, it's funny, because I am of a certain age, and there are people I work with in the newsroom. There's one woman, I'm going to give her a shout out just in particular. Her name's Barbara Britt, and she was the morning news person over on Q107 for a while and Mix 107.3 early in the day. Well, Barbara works for us as a part-time news anchor, and she's been here for a long time. She was here back in the good old days.
Janice knew her then.
And, it's funny. When I started here, I was 21 years old. I'll be honest with you, I am now 57 years old. So I've been here for more than half of my life. But Barbara was here long enough to know all of the personalities who we've been talking about. And when I get grumpy and, I now deal with kids in the news department who are the same age I was when I started here. And I get grumpy and I'll say something that I'm not being patient enough with them. And I'll turn to Barbara Britt and I'll say, "Damn it, Barbara, I've become Bud Steele." And because Bud Steele was the morning anchor when I got here. Bud Steele was a curmudgeonly, I wouldn't say old guy, but he was a chain smoking, unfiltered Chesterfield kind of guy.
An old type newsman is what he was.
Old time newsman, and Bud. It's funny what goes around, that whole circle of life thing. What goes around comes around. I have become Bud Steele, and I kind of take some comfort in that. I kind of take comfort in it.
Yeah.
So,
well, John, don't take comfort. You're a good man, and thank you for doing this, John Matthews. You're
My pleasure.
Great addition to WMAL, and you'll be here for a while. You're 57. You got a good 40 years left.
Oh, great! I don't know what Mrs. Matthews will say about that.
You'll be here longer than WMAL.
Okay.
John has been so interesting, but we're going to take a break right now and then come back and talk more about my favorite subject, WMAL.
Hi, I'm Charles Mann. For athletes like me, playing every down in a pro game is like getting in a car accident. After years of playing football in Washington, my body is broken. I've had countless surgeries and joint replacements. I've been looking for a non-surgical treatment since I ended my career. I heard a radio ad for a seminar about alternative treatment. It's called regenerative medicine, which stimulates your own body to heal and repair itself. No surgery, no more pain. That got my attention. I went to the seminar to learn firsthand all about it. Now you too can benefit and receive this treatment. This is the same procedure that pro athletes use to quickly and effectively recover from injury. If you're looking to eliminate your pain and arthritis, or if you thought surgery was your only option, take the first step like I did. Call 410-787-7250. Register for the next seminar and learn more about this breakthrough procedure. Seating is limited. Register now by calling 410-787-7250 and start living life again.
Hi, Tony Sybil here to tell you about Tony and Joe's and Nick's Riverside Grill at Washington Harbor in Georgetown. Spectacular new restaurants. We've spent a lot of time rebuilding. You'll love it. It's really fantastic. For any information, you can go online to tonyandjoes.com. It'll be a wonderful experience for the whole family. Call 202-944-4545 to make reservations. Everything is fabulous. You've got to come down and have some wonderful food.
You're listening to Our Town with Andy Ockershausen.
This is Andy Ockershausen talking with John Matthews. And John, having you as part of this radio station has been great for us and great for you. And I know one of your great attractions is Disney. Not the company, but the characters, of which you are now one. And as I was telling you off the air, I had the pleasure of being at a table with Walt and his brother Roy at a seafood place in San Francisco many years ago. I was not working, but I was part of NAB as one of the presidents and so forth. So, and my admiration for Disney is unbelievable.
Well, it's funny, and I've been a longtime fan of Disney, and it has largely focused on the theme parks, but I've learned all about the man, learned all about the family, learned all about all of that. But as with most things in my life, would you believe that my attraction to Disney started at WMAL?
Anything's possible.
Well, here's the deal. So I became a receptionist here at the radio station, and
great job.
It was a great job, but it was a part-time job. Didn't have any benefits. Didn't have any vacation time. But I did it for long enough that your secretary, Linda McQueenie, who was the boss of the receptionists, Linda McQueenie came to me and said, "We're going to give you a vacation. We need you to take a week off. It will pay you, but you've been here a long time, so we need you to take a vacation." And it had been such a long time that I was really kind of obsessed with where am I going to go on vacation. A buddy of mine and I decided to take a road trip and drive to Florida. At that point, Epcot had been open for less than a year. So I read everything I could about Disney and everything I could about Disney World because I really wanted to go there. I'd never been there before. And that really started a hobby for me, which only grew huge when Disney ended up buying Capital Cities ABC, which owned WMAL.
Correct.
And once that happened, they started having us cover all the media events because they wanted WMAL to give as much publicity to Disney as possible. And we got big, huge company discounts, so I was able to stay at the parks cheap and go to the parks for free and get merchandise for a big discount. And that just made everything boom. And now I've been to Disney World more than 50 times, and I've been to Disneyland probably about 30 times.
And they gave you great benefits too, John.
They gave me great benefits, and when Disney sold WMAL and sold us to another company, we all got those of us who were vested all got pensions. So someday I'll have a Disney pension, and I appreciate that as well. And hopefully my free pass into the parks will come back when I retire too.
John, see, there were so many benefits to Disney besides being a great company. They were great to the people, and those theme parks proved it. And now they're all over the world with the theme park. And
Yep.
I know the people running the business now, and they all grew up in the radio and TV business that run the Walt Disney Company.
Well, and this is at best a weak connection, but everything that you've always said about WMAL, about it being the people, about treating people right, and if you treat people right, your business is going to be more successful. It's the same thing that you've always said about volunteerism and about working in the community. If you treat people right, they're going to treat you right, and it's going to be better for your business. That's the Walt Disney Company. They have a corporate policy to be that way.
They have wonderful, wonderful overseers of the people. And they take care of people with pensions and benefits that it doesn't exist anymore, John. See, that's the thing. You and I are privy to that, and thank God for that. And Janice is too. We're all Disney people, and it just happened for us, and we're all so grateful. And we're grateful for you, John, for what you've done to keep the flame alive of the old WMAL. Even though it's early in the morning, you keep that flame going.
There you go. I understand you and the missus are going to see a show tonight.
Yes.
What are you seeing?
Cole Porter's Anything Goes.
Anything Goes. Tom Gager would have loved that.
Oh, my God, would he?
At 11:45 when he was doing his "It's Showtime!" In olden days, a glimpse of stocking was looked on as something shocking, but now heaven knows anything goes. Thank you so much.
That's our John Matthews, the world's greatest news director of the world's greatest radio station. John, thank you so much for being with Our Town.
It has been my pleasure.
And stick with that job. We need you, baby.
Okay.
You've been listening to Our Town Season 4, presented by Geico, our hometown favorite, with your host, Andy Ockershausen. New Our Town episodes are released each Tuesday and Thursday. Drop us a line with your comments or suggestions. See us on Facebook or visit our website at OurTownDC.com. Our special thanks to Ken Hunter, our technical director, and WMAL Radio in Washington, D.C. And thanks to Geico. 15 minutes can save you 15% or more on car insurance.